Welcome, everybody. Hope you're having a good night. It's already dark outside, I've just noticed. So things are changing. And as we start to hunker down for the winter, we hope to have more of these activities through, the foreseeable future. So we will be sending you a questionnaire, as a matter of fact, in the next few days for you to help us figure out what's working program-wise and what isn't working, or maybe some new ideas of things you'd like to see, just so that we can all keep getting together and keep stimulated and keep just from losing our minds this coming winter, because chances are we'll be hunkered down at least through the new year, I've heard. So anyway, look for that, please. And also next Thursday, we have our Wine Around the World program. I had announced that it's the third Thursday of the month. It will typically be the third Thursday of the month, but this time, this program and the third Thursday of the month were back to back. So we sort of moved it to next week. But Wine Around the World is kind of our virtual wine tasting program we're doing monthly. And this month it features wines from the Elk Cove winery in Oregon. Pinots mostly, Gris and Noir, I think but our wines will be listed on the website. We have Jana from Cork and Barrel coming. I think one or at least one of you recommended her. Can't remember which one, but anyway, so she will talk about the vineyard and we'll all sample wine. I mean, that's optional, of course, but look for that information. You'll also get that in an email too. But for now, we're going to talk about the movie Boy with Abby Olcese. And Abby, rather than me introducing you and giving my, typical bio, I'd just like to, ask you about your life so far. And I know you went to KU, right?
Yes, I did, yeah.
But you're originally from Pittsburgh?
Yes, actually Pittsburgh by way of Chicago and Portland. So born in Portland, lived in Chicago for most of my childhood years, and then moved to Pittsburgh, Kansas in 1999 with my folks.
And then you went to KU. What did you study at KU?
Journalism.
Journalism.
Okay. I was on the news and information side.
And you're pretty young. How did you become president of the Kansas City Film Critics Circle at such a tender age?
Yeah, I just stuck around, basically. No, I have been doing film criticism off and on since 2012-ish, so about 8 years. And I'd say professionally doing it, like as in getting paid to do it and through publications that have more than just my friends as readers, since about 2015, so about 5 years. So yeah, I started reviewing stuff locally and then left for a couple of years. I lived abroad in Prague for a year. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a year. And then when I lived in D.C., I was interning for an organization called Sojourners. They're a social justice organization. They also have a magazine. And while I was working for them, I just kind of let it slip that I had experience writing film reviews. I was familiar with kind of the publicist system that they had. It was the same one that we had in Kansas City. So I could write for them if they wanted me to, and they said, sure. So I did that for a year and then continued doing it after I came back to Lawrence. And that was kind of my entree into the Film Critics Circle as a member. And then just eventually, as of this summer, the president, writing for not just for Sojourners, but for a variety of other websites. I am currently the film editor of The Pitch magazine in Kansas City. And also I freelance for a number of different websites. So that's kind of my CV.
Yeah. And so we can read your reviews on The Pitch or pitch.com.
Yes. Yeah. Also Crooked Marquee is another place that I write pretty regularly for. I have about one review a week there. And I have a column every couple months or so in Sojourners. So those are my regular haunts.
And I just wanted to throw this in because I know we're all, we haven't been to a movie theater in many, many months. And I know obviously that affects your job. What do you hear? Like, what's the scuttle? Like, when, I mean, when are people saying we'll be back in the theaters, or how does it affect your day-to-day work? And I imagine it's just streaming stuff.
It is. It's been, weirdly, I've been busier now than I ever have before, writing reviews, just because I guess the flip side of nothing going to theaters is that everything's going to streaming, which means that everybody can access it. So you have, like, usually there are some films that like might not come to Kansas City until a few weeks down the road, or might skip some theaters or skip press reviewing at all. That's not uncommon to have some studios who just think that Kansas City isn't a big enough market, basically, so they don't have pre-screenings. But in the current climate, because I write for a lot of websites that aren't just based in Kansas City, because we have a wide readership, and because films are going to a much more widely accessible audience, I can just request a screener link and it's not a problem. So that's been cool. It's been a nice change. The circumstances are less than great, but I'll take it. In terms of theaters reopening, it's just a big question mark right now, and probably not for a while is the answer. There are some independent places that I know are currently open and still trying to make a go of it. Screenland Armor in Kansas City is one, and they have been kind of, they do a lot of repertory screenings already, so they've just basically expanded the number of already released films that they show. They also have been showing movies outdoors on the weekends. For folks who like want to go see a movie, want to leave the house, but don't feel safe doing it in a theater, which I completely understand. Like, I don't feel safe going to a theater. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of pivoting and a lot of innovation where you can do it, and just a lot of realizing what your limitations are otherwise, I think. So yeah, people are kind of figuring it out as they go.
Well, we are about to talk about Boy, but I failed to ask if anyone with us tonight is having dessert. And I would, oh, Carola, and if it's a Kiwi thing, I'm just gonna lose my mind. Let's unmute you, please. Or if you can, unmute yourself. What are you having, Carola?
Well, it's not the Kiwi thing, but it's a pavlova.
Nice.
With canned peaches.
Oh, very nice. Oh, that's beautiful. It doesn't look like you've cut into it, though.
No, I haven't yet.
Anyway, because this is dessert in a movie after all, and so I completely forgot that last time we went around. Is anyone else having a dessert they would like to share? Because we will share the recipe in our follow-up email. I didn't have time to make one. Anyone else? No. Okay, well, Carola, thank you for staying with the program.
You're welcome.
The recipe, I'll put a Kiwi sort of recipe in the follow-up, and I'll try it before we send it out. Okay, so let's talk about Boy. Abby, I know you have some sort of insiders, the backstory to this movie in some respects. What can you tell us what should we know about anything, the director, the cast?
Sure.
It was a big movie, I read, in New Zealand, like a huge movie.
Yeah, one of the, I think maybe the most successful locally shot film in New Zealand. I'm imagining indie film shot in New Zealand, because like Lord of the Rings was shot in New Zealand as well. So that's, but that's still very cool. So the director of this movie is Taika Waititi, and at the time that he made it, was not really a super household name. I remember this movie being really difficult to find, actually. Like, it didn't really get much of a theatrical release outside of, I think, New York and LA and film festivals. It kind of found another life on like DVD and streaming, which is how I saw it. Since then, obviously, he's gone on to make a lot of films, and they've all been wildly successful. he worked on, or he co-directed the film What We Do in the Shadows with Jermaine Clement, who's also part of the comedy team Flight of the Conchords. And that has since been turned into a really good TV show. He also made Thor Ragnarok, if anybody's a Marvel fan, which was kind of the thing that catapulted him into kind of big name status. And after that, just last year made the film Jojo Rabbit, which I can't remember if it got, I know it was nominated for, I think it got a screenplay Oscar for best adapted screenplay last year. And yeah, I saw that film at the Toronto International Film Festival last year, and just remembered, like, I think it won the People's Choice Award that year too, which is always a good sign that something's going to do well in award season when that many people like it. So yeah, I've been following his career for a really long time because I'm a fan of his work as well as a lot of the work of people that he works with frequently. So he's been kind of a name floating around in the back of my head for years, and it's really exciting to see that he's done so well.
And I just wanted to point out, for those of you who didn't read the credits like I didn't, the director played the father.
Yes.
As well. So the director was the actor who played the father. Yeah. Go on. I just wanted to.
Oh yeah, no, that's yeah. So yeah, and you might recognize him from like appearing in acting roles as well in the films that he's directed. He's also in What We Do in the Shadows, and he's also in Jojo Rabbit as Jojo's imaginary friend Hitler. So yeah, and a thing that I appreciate about Taika Waititi, and he has a TEDx talk that you can view on YouTube where he talks kind of about his creative process a little bit. And this, I think, was filmed right after the movie Boy had come out. He talked a lot about being drawn to characters that were considered outsiders, and being drawn to the way that children see the world, kind of seeing it through seeing the world through the lens of a child, is how he puts it. And I think you can kind of see that a lot throughout his work. Not just this movie, especially this movie, but I think that same style also appears in Jojo Rabbit, definitely, since the main character is also a child there. I think it definitely applies to his character, his vampire character in What We Do in the Shadows, has kind of a childlike and naive quality. And I think Thor Ragnarok also has sort of a particularly creative way of seeing the world that makes me think of the way that a child might see a superhero movie, which is why I like that movie so much. So yeah, I think he's got a really distinctive style and sense of humor that kind of sets him apart from a lot of other filmmakers working today.
I also want to say at this point, if anyone has anything to say about, like right now, just raise your hand or send something in the chat, because, sometimes when you switch topics and you're onto something else, like I'm about to go on to that boy. I mean, that kid who, was he really an extra and got cast into that lead role? Is that true?
Yeah. James Ralston is the name of the young actor who plays Boy. I think he showed up and was an extra, and I think it was like maybe days or even hours before they were going to start shooting, and I guess Taika just noticed him and said, you should be in this role instead, and just substituted him in, which makes me feel kind of bad for the kid that he did cast, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it was a great choice because he's amazing. He just has a very and I like the boy that plays Rocky, his brother, as well. They both seem to have a really natural feel, where there's nothing that's really rehearsed or polished about their performances. They really feel like brothers. And he's got such a sweet smile too. It's really cute.
So would you have reviewed this movie if you didn't favorably?
Yeah, I definitely would have. I think I saw this when I wasn't during a time when I wasn't actually actively writing film reviews. I just watched it by myself. But very shortly after that, I made all my friends watch it. I think I invoked my birthday privileges once with my parents and made them watch it with me the night before my birthday. I just decided that was what I really wanted to do with them. So yeah, it's a movie that I've introduced a lot of other people to.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's a New Zealand style, which obviously, but is the director a New Zealander? Like, is he?
Yes.
He
Yeah.
is.
He's
Okay.
native, indigenous Maori. Yeah.
And so he still lives there?
He, I think, goes between LA and New Zealand. Yeah, I follow him on Instagram. I know he just got back there, so.
Well, so Jill is saying, I really like the moment in the movie where the boy takes his first swig of beer from dad and he tries hard to remain cool and said he liked it, but there was a fleeting expression of distaste that flashed across his face, which is really sophisticated acting.
It really is. There's so much subtlety in there. And throughout that too, because I think the boy also smokes weed once, that his dad gives him. And it's just, and like he wears his jacket that one time, it's just like clearly all this hero worship stuff of like he wants to be like his dad and then realizes that like all the things that make his dad who he is are not things that he wants to emulate, and it takes him a while to figure that out. But yeah, there's so many moments like that where you can tell that he's realizing that this is a thing that he maybe isn't into.
So do you have any insight into where, I mean, I'm assuming the Michael Jackson thing is just because it was 1984. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's also an interest of his. A lot of this feels really, I think, personal to him. Like the school that boy goes to is the same, at least it's the same region. The boy lives in the same region where Taika Waititi grew up. So a lot of that, I think, is probably related to his own recollections of growing up in the 80s in that part of the country.
Sharon, I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go.
There's a part at the very end that I'd like you to talk about. The young boy finds just the back symbol that was on his father's jacket, which involved his gang. And I think that was attached to his black leather jacket. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it was on his
black
vest.
leather jacket, I think, was sold because what happens is that patch is off, not because he didn't want it anymore, but I think he sells the jacket, and that's when you get the opal eyes for the carving, the traditional carving. Did you pick up on that and other Maori kinds of things that were happening?
Yeah, I didn't pick up. I mean, I picked up on the carving and the eyes. I didn't connect that maybe that's how he had done that. But I like that idea a lot. Yeah.
It happens right directly afterwards. And that's the only way he could have gotten money is he sold his jacket.
Yeah.
And I wondered if there were any insights you could give us. It apparently is in the same area this Taika is from, the idea of poverty, of lack of employment and so forth, and whether that leads to the same kinds of things we see with indigenous people in the United States.
Man, I mean, I'm no expert on indigenous people, but I do think that there's probably a connection there. I know that in Australian cinema, there's a lot of portrayal of Aboriginal people in kind of a similar way. And I mean, anywhere that's had experience with colonization, I feel like that tends to be kind of a side effect of it, or at least that's a side effect that we frequently see in art that is from those areas. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, but I also don't know specifically.
I just wondered how sympathetic Watiki was to the father. At the end, there seems to be a reconciliation over the mother's grave and that he is finally not in denial.
Yeah, I think he is a little sympathetic. I think I mean, like you mentioned with him finishing the carving and adding the eyes, like he cares just enough. He realizes that he needs to kind of reconnect with some things that matter. and all of the other kind of hyper masculine stuff that he's been trying to be involved in, and like the crime and stuff that he's been part of, that isn't like, I think it takes the epic failure that he goes through to realize maybe that he's not in a good place and that he needs to completely restart. So like maybe there's a future there. I think he's a little more sympathetic to the kids that have to like grow up around that. But I think he also has some sympathy for the dad too.
I was wondering if anyone here has been to New Zealand. Sharon, you have. My son had, but I haven't. Shelley, I had to look up what egg meant, which is just like a big jerk, or or something a little more off color. But I was also very curious about the money in the bag and how much that was actually worth. I just got stuck on, because it was like almost $900.
But that's
right?
New Zealand dollars. That's
New
not
Zealand dollars. And I was thinking, what, because to the extent that they had to go to dig that up, or the boy did, what was that worth? And, put that in context of the poverty and all. And
probably about 600 American dollars.
yeah, I
That's
was
still pretty
wondering,
good.
Yeah.
in 84, yeah, that would have been,
Funny. I
yeah.
thought the goat was a good character.
Yeah.
Apparently, and I missed this, was at the very end, like after all the credits rolled, the goat was featured walking across a dance floor.
Oh.
That was great, yeah.
Yeah, I love the group dance scene at the end, but I missed the goat, so I have to go back and check.
Yeah.
So
But-
Jill, do you want to say this out loud? You can, if you want. Yeah, just let's unmute you.
There you go.
Yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
I thought immediately when he put the money under the seat of the old car sitting there, I said, the goat's gonna eat it. And
Yep.
Yeah.
Scott
Yeah,
Morgan called that
absolutely.
one too.
Yeah, and I think he even makes a joke at one point, like way earlier than that, like the goat's messing around. And he's like, "Why are you always eating other people's garbage? Like that goat's gonna eat something important."
Yeah. Yeah.
Scott, do you want to?
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, foreshadowing. Do you want to verbalize what you said in the chat? I think we should all just talk.
Yeah, you can.
It won't be.
Well, Kathleen told me I couldn't talk.
I am overruling her. You may talk.
Okay. Do you have that power? Because I don't. No, I
Yeah,
was
right.
curious. At the beginning of the movie, I noticed they had just the typed out quote from the movie E.T. about we can grow up together, or something roughly like that. And I wonder, as an element of a movie, if that's a common thing or kind of a curious thing to do to such an important, I mean, that really clearly flows through the movie. Is that a common thing, or just something that you've seen occasionally or at all?
Yeah, to have a quote at the beginning of a movie like that.
Yeah, that's so relevant to the whole context. Essentially, his father is growing up with him after he
Right.
returns, and so that's.
I think, yeah, it depends. Not all the time, but yeah, I think it definitely helps to, like, when you see something like that, obviously you're going to try and see stuff in that context. Like, what does that quote potentially mean in this situation? Also, I think in the context of the movie, I mean, thematically it makes sense, but also it's a really weird way to start it.
Yeah.
Just because it's from E.T., like, of all things. So it gives you a sense of, like, what the attitude of this is going to be. Like, it's going to be kind of irreverent. It's going to be kind of childlike. But yes, also that the content of it is probably going to come into play at some point. They mention E.T. a lot, actually. So now that that's a good observation.
Thank you.
I like the part. I like the part in the beginning when the dad and the two guys arrive, and they don't exactly. I don't know. To me, they didn't look very trustworthy, or. And he invites them in and asks them if they want tea. I thought that was such a sweet gesture.
And then the next shot, you see them all drinking tea in the car. They haven't moved.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I thought one of the most remarkable things was how he reformatted Thriller, which was so important in the young boy's life, and reformats it as a haka, as a Maori dance. I thought that was extraordinary.
Yeah, at the very end. And man, that boy is very good at haka. Did you see his face? He's so good. Oh man. He had all the moves. Oh, I was so impressed.
That's great.
It just brings forth that this is very much a Maori film.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Did anyone else have the sense, and it might just be the current climate we're living in, that sense of dread, that sense of like impending doom, like,
Yes.
God, something's going to, something really, really bad is going to happen. And it never really did. It wasn't, I mean, there was tension and there were the drunken fights but really it was, even the money being eaten by the goat and then that reveal just to me wasn't, which I liked. I mean, I liked that. It wasn't like, oh, but I was so worried.
Yeah.
Probably just me, but I was just so worried the first hour of that movie that something terrible was going to happen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was sure that when he showed up with when boy actually hit his father, when he was disgusted by him and he hit his father, I was afraid the father was going to, beat him up or something, do something terrible. And he didn't. And he totally, pulled his punches or just fended him off instead, which was maybe the most adult thing he had done the whole time up until then.
Yeah.
But I had wondered, since Boy was often obviously making stuff up, from early on about who his father was and what he had been doing. When he said he had been a soldier, had he really been a soldier, or was that just part of his imaginings? Because he certainly liked playing soldier, but I wasn't real clear whether that was at all real.
Yeah, I think it's not. I think he's imagining it. And I think the way that Waititi plays with those perceptions is really interesting too. That especially when he finally realizes that his dad wasn't present for Rocky's birth when his mom died, like at the very end. That it's the same scene, but the only difference is that his dad isn't there, and so he's finally realizing that like all of this stuff, like the soldier stuff, the samurai stuff, this stuff, like all of it, none of it's real.
But one of my favorite parts was actually when the father is saying, I don't have time for toys and games and stuff, and then they spent the whole rest of the day playing war with, limbs of trees and stuff. So it was entirely,
Yeah.
like he was being a little boy again.
Yeah. He doesn't have time for toys and games unless it's manly stuff, right? Like violent stuff.
Yeah. So Dave, did you have a comment?
Dave?
Yeah, I just got back on that theme of potential and how he hit his dad and how he must have been awful frustrated that the environment he was in, he was never going to reach his potential after he finally figured out what potential was.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned that at the start of the movie, and then he mentioned it later.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. And I mean, that's a widely applicable thing, right? Like, I know that this movie is very specific to a particular community, a culture, a place and time, but like the themes are not that different from stuff that we probably see ourselves. Like there are a lot of kids in Lawrence and Kansas City who probably have very similar experiences, like lots of potential, but no way of realizing it. So
I thought the whole incident with the boys going back to look for the dog that got hit by the truck or the car, whatever it was, indicated that goat was a whole lot more important to that family than what was portrayed. I mean, the care that they took with pulling it back and burying it, there was some significance to that goat's presence in that family life.
yeah.
It was the only wildlife they had, and it would give them milk and cheese, and it was also a pet.
Mm-hmm. It was his best
Their
friend.
only pet.
Yeah. So have any of you seen any of his other movies, like Jojo Rabbit or What We Do in the Shadows?
There's also Hunt for the Wilder
Wilder-
People. I forgot.
Wilder-
Oh, right. Hunt for the Wilder People.
After the Wilder People was wonderful.
Yeah.
Again, it's a boy, and he's wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
I think in this movie, one of the important things that just sort of seeps into your subconscious is the juxtaposition of abject poverty against spectacular beauty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
the backgrounds shots were clearly picked to show the beauty of New Zealand or the area that they lived in, and yet these kids and the families were dirt poor, which is really quite ironic. At least to me, it seemed like that.
I thought one of the great lines was the woman who is an entrepreneur. She has 3 things that she does, and the frustration of the young man about getting a job, saying,
He had 'em all.
Yeah.
taking all the jobs. You have all the jobs.
It was great.
She's tough, and that is and I'm glad she's a woman, but I think it's a guide to what is possible. But I felt very sad at the end because he turns and he doesn't quite know the name, what potential means, but he turns to his father and says, I don't have potential. And without, the teachers are abysmal. I also thought about what is a grandmother of that age doing with 5 children, 3 of whom are related as cousins, not necessarily from the same child. Obviously, they are siblings of boy's father, and their parents are not around, and they are very young children. What about those parents, and where are they, and why are those children being left in the care of the grandmother?
Well, and the young woman who was the daughter, I think, of the woman who was the entrepreneur, who was, in the marijuana fields. That was, she was a really, I thought, really interesting character. And
And she likes boy. She likes him. And
yeah,
wants to
yeah,
pay
that was very
attention.
clear. They had a
And
great
all he can do
vibe.
with the Chardonnay.
Yeah, Chardonnay was, I don't know.
I think it's funny that those feel like such like 80s culture based names too, right? Like Chardonnay and Dynasty and Dallas and Rocky.
That's true.
Oh, that's great. I never even thought about that.
That's a great point.
Like those
Yeah,
are
that's a
all
great-
things that their parents were like at least like abstractly familiar with and knew were cool or fancy or important.
Mhm. Well, and then there was the guy on the beach who pulled him out of the water when he fell off the bridge. And
Yes.
he was a great character. That was a fun surprise.
He seems to be developmentally or mentally disabled. And yet he is the person who is gentle and kind and has the insight.
Right.
He has good advice, as it turns out.
And probably saves boy's life because you don't have any idea how he got from falling off the bridge to waking up covered by a blanket. So
right.
Yeah.
So,
No, I
so
thought
do
he
we
was a great
know,
addition.
this, I may have maybe I got up and came back into do we know where the father went? Like, do we know where he was when his wife died in childbirth? Was he in jail or what? Do we know?
I think so. I think he was in jail. That's
Okay,
what
but-
it's implied. That he met the other 2 members of his gang in jail.
I figured that, but I
that
don't.
was my
I don't know that
impression.
it was fully revealed, and that you just make
But there was probably stuff in between there that we don't know. Like, I mean, Rocky's 6 years old. He's been gone for at least that long. So there's stuff in between.
Sure. Yeah. I want to know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Same. Like, how does a person like that survive?
Yeah.
Well,
Just
he had
practically
said
for that
he
long.
was- when he was first talking about the treasure, he said he'd been running from the police. And so it wasn't entirely clear whether he got away from them or not at that time, or whether they caught up with him. But yeah, I mean, just the way the 3 of them acted early on, I felt like, oh yeah, he's just out of prison.
And they're 3 stooges. I mean, he is the superior to the 2 of them. And they
He's
really
Mo.
are local, and yet it's
Smart one.
I don't know what's in their duffels, but it looked like they pretty much looted the house.
Yeah.
And off with
It
his
was marijuana, wasn't
car,
it?
and then
That they
he's
had stolen?
left with even less than
Yeah,
nothing.
wasn't it all the marijuana that they had
Yep, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
ripped
Yeah.
off from the other guy?
Yeah, and then the dad goes through and just kind of destroys the rest of the house because he's so mad.
So
Well, I
Abby,
was assuming he was looking for some money that his mother, the nanny, whatever, might have possibly left behind, which
Mhm.
she obviously had not. So, and probably didn't have anything to leave.
Mhm.
Abby, Scott would like to know, as a reviewer, how do you watch a movie like this and then tell other people about it without giving away the full story? Just typically, not for
Yeah.
this movie, but yeah.
With something like this, I mean, it becomes harder when there's like a major twist involved. This one doesn't have as many, but just trying to give kind of the barest outline of plot. So like, boy lives in rural New Zealand in 1984 with his grandmother and cousins and brother, and his mom died in childbirth with his brother. Their grandmother leaves for a funeral, and a few days later, his dad, who hasn't been around for a number of years, shows up, and the boy tries to reconnect with his dad. That's probably as much as I would say. And then, yeah, probably talk about the style in which it's shot, kind of some basic themes of the movie, like masculinity, fatherhood, growing up, and how it addresses those things.
So do you have a favorite movie review, like one that just stands out in your mind that you just couldn't wait to write?
Oh, one that I couldn't wait to write. So there's one that I wrote just recently that I'm particularly proud of, for a movie that's coming out on a horror streaming service called Shudder. And the movie is called The Mortuary Collection. It's a horror, what do you call it?
Compilation?
What's the term? There's a lot of stories in one.
Anthology?
Anthology, thank you. Yeah, it's not supposed to happen when you're 32, but it happens a lot. Yeah, I reviewed, yeah, it's a horror anthology that has some kind of connective tissue in between. And I thought it was a really creative movie, and you could tell the influences that the director had very clearly. And so it was one that I was excited to tell people about because I thought it was fun. I was excited to write about it because it's always fun when you can like pick up on specific things in a movie that you feel, or like you can tell what the artist was influenced by because it makes you feel smart. And then being able to write about all that stuff in a way that feels compelling. It was a piece of writing I was pretty proud of. And I actually got to interview the director a couple of weeks ago, as well as the star of that movie, and talk to them a little bit about kind of all of the stuff that went into it. And I mean, yeah, reviewers don't always get to find out that they're right about stuff, but I did, and it was nice.
Well, and for
Great.
the record, we discussed at length whether or not to watch, because it's October and Halloween. We really, thought, well, should we go the horror route? And we decided, no, our dreams were bad enough already.
That's perfectly fine. I completely understand. Monday was Indigenous Peoples Day, and so this is the perfect time to watch a movie about an Indigenous filmmaker.
That's great.
Perfect.
Yeah, Kathleen, do I have a favorite movie reviewer?
Yeah, among the
Okay.
world of movie reviewers.
There are a number of people that I like a lot. Some of whom I've been fortunate enough to work with, but I like David Sims, who writes for The Atlantic. I think he's a really good reviewer. Alyssa Wilkinson, who writes for Vox. I like her because I like to write when I can from a spiritual background, because I'm a Christian. That's a fairly significant part of my life, and I'm a a pretty progressive person as well. So I appreciate her because she writes about movies from a similar perspective as me. She's kind of the goal. I like, who else? Josh Larson is another writer who I like a lot. He's on a podcast called Film Spotting that's very good. And he's also, I've worked with him for a little bit on a website that he runs called Think Christian. And he's like one of the best editors I've ever worked with. He's very constructive and very helpful. But yeah, there's lots, there's loads of people, but those are the ones that I like to pay attention to a lot. Also, anybody who writes for Roger Ebert, their stuff is pretty, as you might expect, they have pretty high editorial standards. So a lot of the stuff that comes out there is solid.
Well, I don't want to, not that we're out of time, but I don't want to wrap this up without asking everybody what you thought of the ending and that last line, how was Japan? Were you satisfied by that? That was just, to me, a little, just a little unexpected. I was delighted to see him there at the cemetery, but I personally liked it. Jill, what do you think?
I think that it was a sign of final acceptance of Dad with all of his faults.
So that the question, they knew he hadn't been, or that was Rocky, right, that asked the
They
question?
knew he hadn't actually been to
Rocky,
Japan.
even Rocky knew he wasn't in Japan.
So they were accepting, whatever fantasy Dad wants to trot out, fine. Because all that matters is love and family.
Of course,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure that the dad made that up. I kind of thought Boy made that up about him being in Japan. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking they didn't show the father's face, but I'm thinking he's looking like, what are you talking about?
He carries a samurai sword around.
Right.
Well, and he was Shogun, he wanted to be called
Yeah,
Shogun.
clearly he has a connection with that.
Yeah. I just always like to hear what people think about the ending, because, that's that moment when, if you're in a theater and you go,
the response to see if he was still delusional.
Yeah.
Because I think it was a loving thing for the boy to say, to allow him back into his fantasy. But it would have been a lot more helpful had he continued on a path of healing with his sons, rather than having him encouraged to continue to be a delusional, irresponsible father.
and so then what do you think will happen next? Do you think he will become that?
I thought it tied back to that quote again, because he had ET throughout. And it was, he's come home. They're going to grow up together. And it was the boy and those, I thought they all were kind of coming to terms of where they were, and that they had something to help one another with. And so I found it kind of reconnected, and it's like, okay, we're all going to have to grow up now, but we're going to have fun
Rocky
doing
already
it.
seemed grown up. Rocky was the quiet, thoughtful philosopher who all along knew what reality was. He seemed to be the most mature character of all.
Yeah, he was the one that connected with the guy on the beach, that he totally got him and understood him, and
You get that in.
But
in
he was
religious literature
also
as well, as you know, Abby,
really
the whole
interested in
idea of
superheroes.
the fool, the innocent, godly fool kind of thing. And that's what he
But I don't know that I'd go along with you on the not that he wasn't mature in his own way, but he loved this whole superhero and his own
powers.
His powers
Yeah.
and so forth. So
that's right.
he had his own fantasy world as well.
Absolutely.
I think
I think that
he's a good
children have really damaging things happening, and you cope with it as you can.
Yeah, I think he's a good judge of character. You can tell that he can tell what kind of person you are. He seems very sensitive.
Well, I hope someone comes along and convinces him that he did not kill his mother.
Yeah, I know.
I thought he was making a lot of blame on himself, and nobody seemed to be trying to dissuade him from what he felt was his fault.
Yeah.
It was a very
Um,
warm and fuzzy film, but now that you're talking about it, it seems to be a very sad end.
And well, I think there's a lot of that there, where there's a lot of stuff that's really dark that is underneath, like this layer of humor. Like Rocky's whole belief that he has powers comes from the fact that Boy told him that he killed his mom because his powers were too strong. Like that's
Right.
horrible. That's a horrible thing to grow up thinking. And I think like Boy realizes that all these fantasies that he had of his dad weren't true, and like he had told himself some of those stories so many times that he really thought they were. Like the images are in his brain of like, this is true, this is what happened. But I think that's also something that you see a lot in a lot of Waititi's movies as a whole. Like there's a lot of kind of looking at the ways that I think children especially, people in general and children especially, cope with really difficult circumstances. Like you see that in Hunt for the Wilder People, you definitely see that in Jojo Rabbit. And
Very
yeah, I
funny.
think that's a really interesting road to want to go down as an artist.
He shocks you. I mean, that whole thing of Jojo Rabbit, all of a sudden you see his mother's shoes in the air, and you know what that means.
Yeah, oh, I know. Yeah, it's super dark.
The shoes. So he is very funny, very humorous, gives me lots of joy and absurdity with the goat and everything else. And then he just kicks you right in the gut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also, now that I think of it, I know this is going to sound like a conspiracy theory, but I promise I think it's true. You remember when the dad is cutting Boy's hair, and he has like, it shows a close-up of his knuckles, and he has the word love written on one hand, the word hate written on another one. That is a reference to my absolute favorite movie of all time, The Night of the Hunter. Has anybody seen that one?
Mm-mm.
Okay, it's incredible.
There we go.
So
What kind of movie is it?
it was made in 1955, and it is a story about, it stars Robert Mitchum, and he is a itinerant preacher. He's evil. His whole MO is that he funds his traveling ministry by killing widows and taking their money. And he also has just like really weird ideas about purity and about morality. They're very strict. And so he goes to prison and finds out that the man that he is in prison with, who's condemned to die, he's in jail for robbery. And he stashed the cash somewhere on his property, but he isn't going to tell Robert Mitchum where it is. So Robert Mitchum gets out of jail. The other man gets hanged. And he goes about kind of, well, not seducing because they don't have sex, but he courts and marries the man's widow. And he also has 2 children. And the kids are kind of the other main perspective of the movie. Like the little boy, John, and his interactions with Robert Mitchum, who just basically tries to torture the whereabouts of the money out of the kids. And the kids eventually go on the run and meet a woman who kind of takes them in and takes care of them and helps them to kind of heal from all the bad stuff that Robert Mitchum has done to them. But an important line, like right at the end of the movie, is that Rachel, the woman who takes them in, gives this speech about kids and about how little children, like at one point she says it's a hard world for little things. Like it's really difficult for vulnerable people, children included, to grow up in a world that's really harsh. And the movie is set during the Depression, so obviously like it's very true then. I think it's true now too. But at the very end, she gives this speech where she talks about the resilience of kids, and the last line of the movie is "They abide and they endure." So I wonder if that might perhaps be an influence there, because I feel like you see that a lot throughout his movies, and I wonder if maybe that's something that kind of took root at some point. It feels like it could be true.
I don't know. I think he thinks Maoris abide and endure.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Everything that they've been through. And he has a special feeling for children, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure that it's derivative of anything other than his his enormous intelligence and the background he has with parents who were incredible people, and a mother who had him read from the very beginning and who was a highly cultured person.
Yeah.
I think it's him. I don't.
Yeah. Oh, I think so
don't
too.
believe
Yeah.
it is elsewhere. Plus, those are universal things. Love and hate, the two dichotomies.
Hmm.
You see it all the time. I've seen it in other films. So
Those are also references to Night of the Hunter, but yes.
Right.
Like,
Check
in,
that out.
yeah, and Do the Right Thing
Charles?
with
Right.
the rings on the fingers. That's a direct reference. He says the entire speech.
right.
But yeah.
Well, so what we normally do at the end of at the end of these things, like we've had so many, we've had two. So what we did last time was for everybody just to give the rating. We did the 1 through 5 stars. And so if you guys want to just either say, how many stars would you give it? From 1 being the lowest to, Jill says 5.
Ooh.
Both of the bears
Cool.
just say
See,
5.
1.
The lows say 5, 4. I would say 4.
I'd give it a
for
4.
Pat, for
Or
Kelly.
3.
Yeah, just so Scott's 4. Dave,
Or
4. Yeah, good.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good. So thumbs
Yeah,
up.
nice recommendation, Abby.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
speaking of recommendations, if you all have any, try to keep it to the Canopy world of the film inventory on Canopy. But if you have any movies you've watched lately that you really would like everybody to watch and discuss, please let us know, and we'll follow up. We'll follow up with an email probably about the wine event coming up next week, and then we'll, for you guys, include some notes that I took tonight, just with the director's other movies and some of the references that Abby made. But Abby, thank you so much. It was really
wonderful.
great. And
Yeah,
it
thank
was
you
a
for having me.
great-
This was
It was
great.
a great movie you picked, and I think we're all better for it. And
Good. I hope so.
so anybody else have anything to say or ask or?
See some of you on Friday.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, we have a coffee break. We do have coffee every week and talk about all matters of things, 10 a.m. So if you don't have the link to that, please let us know and we'll send it to you. And
I did have one quick question on at the very end when they are on either side of the mother's grave. Does anyone know, was that just, the visual thing it's supposed to be, or is there some particular tradition that Maoris may have about visiting the grave, or I just didn't know whether I didn't know whether it had more symbolism than I was aware of. I
It
guess
looked
is
like
what
a
I
Christian
was-
burial.
it was
It was
what?
traditional
Sharon?
with the tombstone and everything. That was like a traditional Christian burial. If it had Maori overtones, the physical sense of the tombstone and the thing is Christian.
Although that was the only tomb in the graveyard that was brightly colored.
The kids
Mhm.
did that.
Yeah, because the kids had colored on it.
Kids did it.
Kids did that. They drew on their mother's tombstone.
Mhm.
I thought it was interesting that it was, I don't know, the water jugs they left, they, washed their hands.
That's Jewish.
Yeah, it's,
That's Waititi. I picked that up immediately. As you exit a cemetery, there's always outside. You always have a jug or something. You wash your hands in a Jewish cemetery, and that is his background. And he threw that in. I don't know whether Maoris do it. I don't think so.
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
That tickled me.
yeah.
Well, thanks everybody.
Yeah,
And-
another
and
great one.
Abby, thank you.
Yay,
Thank you for having me.
bravo.
It's
Five
great.
stars to Abby.
Yeah, thank you so much.
5
Yeah,
stars to you guys. You guys were great.
Everybody was great, and so glad you enjoyed the movie. I mean, we will pick one maybe next month that doesn't have an adolescent boy featured. We need some
Maybe an
female,
adolescent girl this time.
we need,
That's
yeah,
right.
we need a girl or something. But both of them have been really.
Yeah, really
I
good.
love coming of age movies with boys. That's just.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah,
everybody.
thanks so
Have
much.
a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Do I do
See you
this?
Friday.
Yep. See you Friday, 10 a.m.